Hello, Internet. Na 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 na. So, today I wanted to talk about the Night of the Owls, but only the Batman issues, because that's all I got, and I just went and picked up the run today. Batman became $3.99. Why? But there's some extra pages and good story, and it kind of works, so yeah. But I want to talk a bit about on the collecting of it, because that was something I ran into today. So first off, I wanted to get the Batman and the Nightwing, but I have Nightwing 1 through 3, and I was just going to pick up 4 through. And then, apparently Nightwing 4 is impossible to find. It's like $20 to pick up the issue by itself, right now, online, if you can find it, maybe. So, that sucks. And it got me thinking maybe it's time to try to get a tablet and do some digital stuff, because that's one of the cool things about digital is you don't have to worry about any of this. You can just kind of grab the issues for what they're worth. And after a while, DC said they're making the issues $1 less, so it could be a way to try out some stuff that maybe you weren't so sure on. So I'm kind of looking into that a little bit. That being said, if anyone happens to know a shop that has Nightwing 4 and wants to talk to me, work something out, that would be cool. The other thing was, my comic shop ran out of the Batman annual, so I can find that pretty readily, and I'll probably figure something out, but kind of one of those things, it's like, why? When I'm talking about these Night of the Owls issues, again, the Batman issues only, I'm just going to kind of drop the hog, so if you didn't want it spoiled, you've already committed to your view count for this video, so thank you, and you can disperse. So in the 8th issue of Batman, we see kind of just him still healing, and they talk a bit about that and how he's coming out, and then the owls start descending on his house, and so his plan is to lock people up, make out the Call, which will lead him to every tie-in that there is, I'm certain. And then, he kind of takes them all out in this giant bat suit. Can someone say new toy? Which was kind of badass and interesting. Kind of wasn't something I was expecting. The Batman, for some reason, felt more like an Iron Man thing. I don't know. That was pretty cool. But it was just kind of like a 2-note story and then done. Then you led into, the Call, like I said, which was interesting because it was a backup, but it was they kind of made this deal about it with the writer and the artist, and I was like, it was interesting, it had its moment, but there's more pages dedicated to it than there needed to be, so yeah. Now, then there was issue 9, and this was kind of a interesting, it's kind of an eye-grabbing cover, but after you look at it a bit more, I don't know, it kind of wasn't so much fun. I found this issue interesting. I'll admit, if I was reading this month to month, this probably would have been the issue where I was like, what? Because it's not, I mean, it just kind of continues the story, and there's some revelation. It's probably the closest to detective that there is, so there's that, but it just kind of moves along. The backup in this is really interesting, caught my eye for kind of the Pennyworth back, and really played into something that I was really interested in when I was reading about the New 52 and the relaunch, and something Scott Snyder was talking about with this Batman relaunch, which was the idea of building up Gotham around Batman and kind of making it more of a city, which was something I'm interested in, and I think that's something you'll see. Like, if you hear people talk about kind of the fictional cities, it's usually pretty much Metropolis or Gotham for obvious reasons. But people tend to think of Gotham more. And that's kind of interesting because I've heard a number of times in a number of discussions, no matter where it is, people seem to relate and be like, Gotham's like this city or whatever big city that they kind of identify with for whatever reason. Because they kind of see like the good and the bad, and it just feels like a big city. Whereas Metropolis feels like utopian by comparison, right? But we all know it's not. And it's interesting because I heard, Gotham is supposed to be New York, and initially, that makes sense, but really, ever since the animated series, Gotham's really been more Chicago. And that, like I said, in the wake of the animated series, which really redefined Batman from the ground up, near as I can tell, everything that I've heard, they're like, oh yeah, the animated series did that, or this, or exemplified this, or made this character more popular. And so the understanding of that being that kind of gang was interesting. And seeing that now, and then seeing Gotham kind of played very much more as its own and having its own mythology, not being mythology that's supposed to be so symbolic of something else, but just story building for the story's sake, I find a lot more intriguing. It's a take on the whole mythos that is so much more engaging. It's just that kind of thought and interplay that makes this title, Batman, kind of the book to read from DC across all the Bat titles, whereas the other ones don't quite match up as much. And I think if anyone was maybe trying to pinpoint on that, I think that's why. It's that world building in so many ways that really play a part and make the whole thing seem bigger, but big to a point of a scale that's so imaginable that it's the right level, especially for a character like Batman. So Batman 10 kind of wandered for me as far as the series goes. As you go through, you see Batman kind of pin down the Court of the Owls more. They've actually infiltrated on a more upper level within Gotham City. And then you just see so much, especially the sequence with Miss Powers and her being locked in the elevator. Assault on the court. And this page, I mean, this well, it's not a layout, but I mean, this page here is a hell of a splash page. Not, the most gripping splash page, but as far as being kind of a credits page or whatever, it's very in your face. I really like the art on that. I mean, there's no two ways about it. The art on Batman is half the reason, as it should be, that makes this book so great. It's really kind of on that level of the Ramos to Spider-Man. I mean, once you see that, there's kind of no going back, because it's that perfect level between, like realism, cartoony, that just makes for a great comic. And then where this issue started to lose me was Batman talks about talking to the great detective Henry Duncard, and talks about that thing that you've probably heard if you've read any other detective-based stuff or whatever, that like gut feeling that you're on the right track. And it was interesting, but it kind of took me back in two ways. A, Batman's supposed to be the world's greatest detective, so him kind of referencing someone else, not just referencing, but referencing in reverence, kind of threw me off. I mean, I guess he'd have to learn from someone, whatnot, but it just threw me through a loop. And also because, Batman's supposed to be the world's greatest detective, yet as he's following this case in the Court of the Owls, which is also personally tied to his most obsessive case, the murder of his parents, which never quite got to see the full interplay there, at least not yet. That kind of took me aback, because he doesn't seem like the world's greatest detective. He doesn't seem like much of a detective at all. It really feels like an action-adventure story, a superhero story, whereas Batman's supposed to be a detective. And that's one of my major complaints about a lot of Batman stories, is it's more about I'm Batman than him ever being a touch more Sherlock Holmes or anything. And that really came out in this issue. Also, the whole spin of the villain, that's your brother or your long-lost relative of any kind, is the kind of twist that I despise anymore. If it's built in, something like that, but in a mythos like Batman that's so long and so well established, bringing up long-lost family members is annoying, basically. It's just kind of a conceited way to create, not conceited, but a lazy way, really, to try to create relevance to a villain to hopefully set them above the rest. Whereas they came so close with the Court of Owls thing. I mean, think about it. I mean, yeah, brother, father, whatever, and then forced to fight over, internal politics or being on the other side of the coin, what have you, and we want our hero to win despite the whole family issue that might tear them apart. Here we have the owl character, Owlman. Wait, no, DC already has one of those now. And he has to be Batman's brother. Whereas if they had the Court of the Owls and then they had a family that was rich and wealthy, and that's very well established now with All-Star Western and certainly other Batman mythos, and then that family was rich and powerful, but their son was a bit off, and then something similar happened to that person's parents, much as had happened to Bruce's. And you find out that the owls are connected and trying to play the odds, see what happens, mess with the wealthiest, and see if they can, take these legitimate funds and whatnot and create that motivation to create these powerful players. Because, Batman's Batman. Imagine if you had someone Batman level on your side, and just that kind of, interplay, and, finding that Batman figured out the case, but then having another layer to that, and then having kind of, this dark parallel to it. It creates for more of a conspiracy and something... obviously if you do something like that every time, it becomes the same deal as me complaining about the family thing. It's just... it's so wrought and so done, and I just... it was the one twist that really kind of bugged me, because especially when there's what is it? Splash page, another page, 2, 3, 4... 5 pages of comic where Batman's caught in a net and this guy is the owl. As the Great Owl said, Who am I? And I'm like, that's not menacing, that's borderline hilarious. Really? If that was Batman Beyond, touch more Spider-Man in him. Who am I? Who? You're nuts. It feels so contrived, and it was the one note that really sunk this whole event down for me. And even then, it's not that bad, and I see what they're going for, and it's interesting. But the idea of pulling a Batman's brother out of nowhere felt like the one note that really took what could have been the best event in DC history since the Sinestro Corps War, and really drag this down. And honestly, even with it being a decent comic, this is my single least favorite issue written by Scott Snyder in all of his Batman history, reaching all the way back to when he took over on Detective. So that's my heart. And even then, like I said, it's not bad. It's just the laziest thing Scott Snyder's done in his career. Then there's issue 11, which really puts a tiny spin on the whole thing, on whether the truth of him being the brother or not, and they really played up, and I don't know. It almost, from my perspective, sounds like writer's guilt about using that. That's really the bulk of the issue, except for the whole thing with Dick coming out of issue 7 that led into all this. Him smacking Dick, which was hilarious. Yeah, that's really it. It was a good event. If you're interested in it, I'd recommend reading it. I can't speak to all the side stuff. I heard the annual's interesting, but not as related. But yeah. That was my take, 7 out of 10, pretty good, but one note just kind of ruined it for me. So there you go. Hope you're all having a great Wednesday, and hopefully I'll hit you soon with another comic review.